be enough to be helpful. Okay, brilliant. Um, so it's really lovely to be back with you. Lots of familiar faces. Can I just check? Is there anybody here who's not met me before, either online? Okay, Jackie.
Jackie Barron won't
Okay.
me.
Well, nice to meet you, Jackie, for the first
Hi.
time today, and
And
nice to
you?
see everyone else again. So, what I'm going to try and do today is bring you up to date with kind of where we've got to. So much has changed, and also as I was talking to Colin, kind of in preparing for this meeting, I'm aware that some people may have met me ages ago. Other people maybe in the interim, and some people will be new, like Jackie. So I'm going to try and cover all of the bases to some extent, and and as an educator, I tend to really focus on trying to bring to life what we're doing. And one of the things that's really lovely to hear about in terms of well-being, which is what our work is all about, is this walk. I think it's tremendous. And I've got Harold whispering in my ear over here. You'll meet Harold in a moment, saying, I want to go on a walk. And I'm like, can I hold you on my arm for 4 hours? I don't know if I can hold him on my arm for 4 hours, but I can only but try. So with something like that. But that sounds absolutely tremendous, and something we definitely would just has it just speaks to the kind of work we do. So I'm going to share a screen with you a bit, and it does look like I'm able to share a screen, which is
Yes,
great.
you are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gordon. And in terms of what I want to do is show you a little bit of some of the things that are on our website, just so you know where to find more information. But I'm not going to start there. What I want to start with is kind of where we are in terms of the Essex and East Hertfordshire work. So hopefully you're all seeing a great big purple blob, which doesn't look too interesting. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Ah, excellent. Good. That's how we like to start. So let's just open the curtains and just thinking about kind of Coram Life Education. Now, I'm the educator manager for the Essex and East Hertfordshire branch of Coram Life Education. They're educators like me all over, indeed, all over the world, to be honest. In terms of where we are and with the Coram charity, we work across England into Scotland. There are some fingers crossed that we might actually get something going in Wales, as they've put 6 main tenets, and one of them is about well-being, being absolute like one of their highlights. So it'd be really nice to think about Wales. But right now, let's focus on Essex and East Hertfordshire, and I have put where the journey continues, partly because giraffes do travel in journeys, and it has been a bit of a journey. So people who've been with us kind of from the start, you'll remember there was a bus, okay, the life bus. And wasn't it tremendous? And people did so much work to get that bus up and running, to get it towed, to actually find towers who would take it from place to place. Um, and that was where we had children come in. So we'd go from school to school. The children would come and join us on the bus. And we'd run through a program which is about helping children think about decisions that they can make as they grow up, hopefully helping children make healthy choices. That's the tagline on the bus, and that remains kind of the main remit of our work. We're a health education charity, and life education itself started in Australia back in the sort of late 1970s as a drug education program, and that's where it sat in this country for a long time, with a real focus on drug education for children in primary schools. So it was raising awareness, starting when we're talking about drugs, starting with medicine safety, for example, and then thinking about, well, what sits behind our decision making, not just about drugs, but about anything to do with our health. So we work a lot with trying to set down the foundations for thinking, and I'll go through a little bit of those specifics. But while we're talking about a bus, there is no longer a bus, because we had already started to move with the times, and the bus was expensive. The bus is not terribly comfortable. It's magic, but it's a little bit tricky. The bus is also not terribly environmentally friendly. So right across the country, we've been thinking, how can we actually work in a different way? And with your help, actually, we managed to put together and purchase a tent called the Life Space. And this goes into schools. And we had started to work with what we call the Life Space, as opposed to the Life Bus, really successfully. About half of the schools just came on board with us. They heard the message that we need to be sustainable in the longer term. So we need to make sure that we're cost effective. And possibly at least equally, if not more so, we must be environmentally sensitive. The bus is not. The life space, much more so. So while I still might be traveling from place to place with this life space, we're not towing a whole extra vehicle. So that in itself, the schools really responded to that message. And actually, we put it out there as Harold, who's our giraffe. You'll meet him shortly. Harold goes green. He didn't literally turn green, but he did become much more environmentally conscious. So with that message, off we went. And then, as Gordon's mentioned, the world's changed just a little tiny bit. And we've had COVID. And with COVID-19, we couldn't put children into any of our enclosed spaces safely. Now, a lot of work has been done on this to try and look at making these spaces safe as we move into the future. For right now, other than, I think there's one area that's trying to work with the life space reasonably successfully. But as we know at the moment, that's even trickier. But during the time that schools and all sorts of places were closed, we had to look at new ways of working. One of those is something called life base. Life base, when the schools are open, as they have been open now, the educator goes straight into the classroom. That's something our schools have an option on, but it's not something I'm promoting hugely at the moment, and I'll come back to why. Much more so in this area, we have been absolute leaders in what we call SCARF Live Online. When we talk about life education, SCARF is the curriculum, the online curriculum that schools actually buy into as part of Coram Life Education. That didn't exist back in 2012 when I started with this, when we were a bus that came once a year to a school. What's happened over the last 10 years has been absolutely tremendous in terms of really equipping schools to work effectively with children in the whole area of personal, social, health and economic education, or PSHE, you might hear it called. And then over the last couple of years, you may have heard the government's brought in some parts of this which are statutory. So not the whole of PSHE, but what we call the relationships and health education curriculum, or relationships, sex and health education curriculum. And that is statutory now for all schools. The sex education aspects are not statutory at primary, they're statutory at secondary, but primary schools are encouraged to include age-appropriate content around sex education. So I'll talk a little bit about that, because that is something that I'm hoping to work more and more actively with schools around. So the bulk of my work now is SCARF Live Online. Some of my work and some of the bookings, particularly in the summer term, will definitely be around the relationships and health education, or RSHE work. However we go to a school, there is, of course, Harold, okay? And lots of you have met Harold before. There's a little picture of me. Do you want to come in to say hello? Yeah, come and say hello, Harold. So if you've not met Harold before, so I know, Jackie, you haven't, this is Harold. Come have a look around, Harold. See everybody? That's it. That's how. And so Harold has worked with this program since the start. Is that back in the 70s, really? You look a bit different. He's had a few makeovers. So if you find some old photos of Harold, and even in the time when I've started, you've had about 2 makeovers since I've started. This is Harold, who works with us. Harold's got a really important job in terms of life education. Partly, he's a puppet. Okay, don't tell him, all right? He doesn't like the P word much, but he is a puppet. And the reason we use puppets in education is because they allow us to talk about tricky things. They allow us to talk about feelings, really, and relationships, and stuff that's a little bit hard sometimes, because we don't want to make it terribly personal to one person. So puppets, or in this case Harold, or other characters in educational contexts, are used to help us do what we call depersonalize tricky conversations. And my job is to actually help schools have those tricky conversations and equip the teachers and the children to actually join in that in a way that's really engaging. Harold also is memorable. Long past the time the children are going to forget who I am. Okay, they will forget, even though I wear funky earrings with giraffes and all of that. Actually, I will just eventually be the crazy lady who used to be on a bus and then a tent and maybe online, and then I'll disappear altogether. But Harold won't. He will stick in people's memories. And we know that when you come across things on Facebook and so on, Australian teachers, when they come over here, they go, oh, it's a happy, healthy Harold. And they look forward to him. He looks completely different than Australian Harold, but he's who everyone remembers. Okay, Harold, I'm going to just pop you away for the moment. All right, thanks. So what I want to do is take you through, just in a very quick way, what sits behind our programs, because we are much wider now than a drug education program. That's one small bit of what we do. We're looking at decisions people make around their health, and as I say, equipping young people to start to make those decisions. And they will be starting to make them already if you've got young children yourself, or even grandchildren, or even great-grandchildren. You'll know they start making decisions for themselves ever so early. And our first grandchild has just turned 3, and I can tell you the number of decisions she makes that we have nothing to do with is astonishing. So we want to make sure that young people can make healthy decisions. So I'm going to ask you just right now to make a decision, okay, about your own well-being. Okay. I'm not going to ask you to actually share what this decision is, but I just want you in your own head to think about something that you could do. You might have done this for me before. Okay? So think about something you could do now that you know would improve your well-being. Okay? So any old thing. Okay, so keep that in your head for a moment. Now, I'm not going to ask you what that thing actually is, but I'm going to just bring more of you up on the screen so I can see you now. So I can see all of you now on my screen. What I would like you to do is now just think about that decision that you know is something that could improve your well-being in some way. And I want you to now decide, how likely is it that you're going to do this thing that you know could improve your well-being. Right. So on a scale of 0 to 5, with 0 being it's fairly unlikely that you'll do it, or probably really not at all the way up to 5, with that 5 being very likely that you're going to do this thing. So just with one hand, can you show us how likely are you to do this thing? Okay. Oh, I've gone off the top of the scale over there, Jackie. Well done. Okay. Oh, right. Okay. Okay. All right. We've got very honest people here as well. Okay. Brilliant. Now, there's no judgment involved here. I'm really interested, actually. There are quite a few high ones, a few middling ones, and then Jackie off the top of the scale. Fantastic. Okay. What I am interested in, and if you could just be brave enough to unmute and just pop in, okay, with a couple of ideas here. When you were deciding the likelihood there, what was it that made you decide that actually it's quite likely, or maybe not so likely, that you'll do this thing that you were thinking about? Just unmute yourself. Oh, you can see Jackie talking there, but you need to unmute so I can hear you.
Because it's good for me.
Okay, so you know it's going to be good for you in some way. Okay, brilliant. So you went off the top of the scale because that's really important. Okay, brilliant. What else either helped people make it likely or made it less likely, got in the way?
Well, in my case, I could do it now, but I don't. So I'd have to put a squib somewhere to make me do what I should do.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, that's really an interesting kind of, yeah, how do we actually get from here to there? That can be quite tricky. Okay, brilliant. Colin, you're going to come in with something? Or Joan?
Just about willpower and the ability to apply something that you promise yourself you'll do.
That's interesting. So actually what you've just thought about there, willpower is like an attitude or a mindset. Ability to do it is like a skill, isn't it? Okay, so that's something a little bit different. Okay, brilliant. Just hold those ideas right where they are at the moment. Because when we're working with young people, we're working the same sort of things. And one of some of the research that sits behind our program, and we didn't make this up, by the way, this comes from research into effective health education, as in health education that actually changes people's behaviors, okay, as well as their thinking. So knowing some things, actually that's important. And that's probably the easiest bit of this. So we all know quite a lot of things that we could do to improve our well-being in our life generally, okay, in all sorts of areas. But how likely are we to do those things? Well, that actually has much more to do with skills, okay, as Colin was just describing, also with attitudes, with our mindset about things. and knowing that maybe we can change what's going to get us there. Do we need something like a time management skill? Do we need an assertiveness skill, like being able to ask for what we want? Do we need actual physical skill to actually walk the Hertfordshire way or whatever it might be? So that might be a training in physical skill. These three areas come together in all effective personal social health economic education, PSHE, or just health education generally. So that sits behind what we do in our workshops with educators. It also sits behind that wider curriculum that schools access, which is called SCARF. All right, and I'll show you a bit more about that in a moment. So what does that look like at the moment? Well, I mentioned SCARF Live Online, and some of you will have seen aspects of this before. So I'm going to try and give you a little bit of a tour to bring it to life. And what I would say, when we're having our tour of this now, is that people are welcome to come and observe, like when I used to be there in a tent or there in a bus. And often members of your group would say, actually, can I come and just see what this looks like in real life? So while I'll try to give you a flavour right through the workshops now, there's nothing like actually seeing it in action. And because we're online, actually it's quite easy to have observers. So that's something, if you want to liaise through Colin, or just email me directly, or liaise through Susan, whatever, just let me know and we can arrange for that to happen. And it does actually make quite a big difference. I know Colin and Joan were along a few weeks ago to see what this looked like in action, and it really made a difference to kind of just being able to visualize it. So we have sessions, as you can see now, with SCARF Live Online. This is from the website. So we have workshops for every year group, from nursery, okay, from the very youngest ones right up to years 5 and 6, where you see they have some choices even about what they can choose to do. Although, actually, to be fair, I only let year 5 do option A, and years 5 and 6, well, they get a choice of any of those, depending on what they did before. But year 5 now always do that one with me. I'm a bit bossy about it. So, and like all of our workshops, that whether we're in a bus or a tent or in the classroom or live online, the idea of our program is that it builds year on year. And then we do have some additional work as well. So we have other options for schools to come in on. The one that I'm focusing on in this area is looking at that relationships education, and especially supporting schools to deliver the tricky bits. So the workshops for years 4 to 6. And that's where we start dealing with things like puberty, with understanding our bodies in much more detail. And I'll go through some of the details of that as well. So those workshops have to be delivered in school. So I didn't even offer them out during the pandemic until last summer. And so in July, as it started to feel like we could more safely start to be in school without dragging a virus from school to school, some of the schools picked up on that. And I have some of those schools already booked in again for this year, and another one. So far we have 3 booked in for the summer term, and hopefully we'll get more. That's a face-to-face life base in the classroom delivery, the children's classroom. Live online is the bulk of what I'm doing. And actually that's been tremendous in keeping us going, keeping us interacting with the children. So live online, one of the things that's different about it than actually going live in person is that it involves much more than the workshop with me. It involves, first of all, training the school staff. And so the school staff have quite a long session with me, usually about 45 minutes. And even the schools who've done live online before, because this is an opportunity for teachers to access some professional development around personal social health education. That's not an area they often get a lot of professional development in. So as we're coming into our second year, if it's a new school, we'll spend a bit of time sorting the technology out, okay? Because we've got to make sure the tech works or else the sessions die. So we do a few of the practicalities. We also show people where to go on the website, because this is a 3-part program. It's not just me. Before I come, there's a special lesson on SCARF, not just your everyday lesson. It's a particular lesson which sets up what's going to happen in the workshop that I'm leading. So the teachers do a specific SCARF lesson which is related to what I will do, and brings the children into starting to think about it. So within about a week of my coming live, the children do this first lesson. And then I come live, so I'm like the really tasty filling in the sandwich. And then afterwards is a part 3. So the teachers have signposts to other existing scarf plans, or sometimes there's something even a bit additional, or things they go back to from part 1 to kind of follow through, maybe create something where they have a bit of an assessment there as well. So the whole thing fits together. It's actually quite a tremendous piece of work, because it takes these 3 different sessions together. And then, of course, the staff have quite a lot of input from me about how to get the most out of this. So they partly understand some of the things like we've just done. What's the program about? What sits behind it? How do we facilitate this session well? And through that training with the teachers, we also insert very quietly a few of the methods that we use. So things like open questioning. So there's not a right or wrong answer for most of what we're doing. What we're trying to do is really get children actively participating, talking to each other. Because another thing that sits behind what we do is that I can be reasonably entertaining. I can be reasonably memorable, at least for a period of time. But actually, most of what I say will have very, very little difference in terms of what the children eventually decide about when they're making their own decisions. Okay? So stuff I say, very little importance actually. What's much more important, Harold, of course, Harold's really important because he'll be in their memories, and what the children say to each other. So even in a live online workshop, my job is not to actually, as I'm doing now, telling you lots of stuff, which is sort of not usually what I do. Actually, with the young people, it's about getting them to tell each other stuff and talk with each other. So, and it's a tremendously kind of reassuring to me that we can do this even online. And one of the things that's great about the work with the staff is that we're actually helping teachers do this even more effectively. And lots of teachers are very good at this, but not always, because the emphasis is slightly different when you're facilitating the children talking with each other. And what comes out are sometimes the things that don't come out in a literacy or a numeracy lesson. They're the unexpecteds if we get the questioning right, if we set up the groups right. So actually working jointly with the teachers, giving them a real opportunity to work in just a slightly different way that might well impact their practice in this area later on. As well as the teachers, we've in this area have started building in workshops for parents and carers. Now that's something we used to do when we were face to face. And during last year, I think it was actually Fernix Pelham, who I've just seen today. And last year they said, oh, can we do something for the parents? And I said, oh, do you know what? I don't see a reason why we can't. And so we just put a workshop in and parents came. And actually more parents came up to an online workshop than they ever did to kind of one in school. It worked really well. So my record so far, I think, is 45 parents coming. But we run it even if there's one, right? Because, if that one parent comes, it's the parent who needs to be there. And that's something which came through to me at readings in school a bit earlier this year in December. They put the message out to the parents, but just this one parent came along. And so I ran the workshop with her. And the head was there, the deputy head was there, I think, for it. And then she had to go because something happened. And we weren't quite finished. So I said, that's fine, because school staff usually are there. I said, that's all right, you can go. And this one parent stayed on with me. And it turned into like one of those doorknob conversations that you have, that it turned out that actually she had faced the most tremendously challenging situation, had something like 7 house moves and 3 school moves in the last 4 years or something. It was really challenging. She was looking at another house move, really worried about her children. And that's why she'd come to find out, what can I do to make this easier for my children? And actually that was really helpful, because I was able to signpost her back into the school, alert the school to the fact that there was a situation they needed to help with. So these things happen. So anyway, it's a program which wraps around. It's not just that sort of 40 minutes with the young people. It's a lot more. But I'm going to stop talking just for a moment here, at least live. I want to give you a very briefest glimpse of what this might look like with the children. And I'm going to travel back in time with you now to the very first pilot that we did of the very first Scarf Live Online. And actually, in finding this little clip from this pilot, just to show you kind of what the children react like, it was amazing for me to see how far we've come. So it's actually moved tremendously. Several hair changes since then as well, so beware of that. But here's the tiniest clip from a year 1-2 mix of key worker children at a time when schools were closed except to those very small number of children. And this school said yes, they would actually pilot it for us so we could get this off the ground. This is what it looks like.
It's happy. Just show a happy face right now.
Okay.
Okay, great. So quite a few of you. Super. Now, everyone can try this, even if your word was different, okay? So everybody try now. What we're going to do is all together say the word happy and imagine that you can catch the word very gently in your hand. All right? So say it.
Happy.
Catch it. Got it? Hold it there gently. Now, use your face to show happy again. That's it. Great. And now you're going to throw the word into the bucket. You ready? Throw it. Woo! You've got it. It's there.
Okay. I absolutely loved that group because they were the group that let us know that this was going to work. In terms of that awe and wonder, the magic that happens, and which is quite easy to get to happen when you're in something like a bus with lights that flash and all kinds of things go on and big bodies. And what we needed to do with Live Online was to recreate that feeling of, oh, wow. And that group let us know that we could do this. Now, I've got a lot better at that since, okay? So we can recreate the magic a little bit better. But even that, and those faces will let us know we should carry on. So what I'd like to do is now, I'm going to go fairly quickly now because I know I've been talking for ages, is just take you through the different year groups just to give you a really quick flavour of where this goes to. So in nursery, to be honest, the children just tell us what they're learning, and then Harold and I meet them on their territory. Okay, so if they're learning about dental hygiene, we'll bring our toothbrush along. If they've gone on a nature walk, we'll bring some bits of nature in. If they're reading The Hungry Caterpillar, we'll bring in The Hungry Caterpillar book and all of the bits and pieces. So we meet them on their ground, and then we move into reception. And reception is where you start to get this 3-part program come together. Before I come, an educator from Aberdeenshire called Amy, wonderful. She reads them a story with her absolutely brilliant Aberdeenshire accent, all about feelings. And in this story, well, Harold's listening along, first of all. And there are quite a lot of different feelings. The workshop might be called Happy, Healthy Me, but Brenda experiences quite a lot of feelings in this book because she creates this robot. But sort of true to form, as parents do sometimes, her father does not recognize this pile of junk as a robot and throws it away. Just in a helpful move, trying to tidy up the shed where she likes to play. And Brenda experiences quite a lot of feelings. And many of them are quite big feelings like disappointment and anger. And to try and help Brenda cope with her feelings, she thinks about lots of things that maybe have helped before, some things that didn't help before. And then she remembers about this game. And this is the skill we learn with the small children. It's a game that we call Tin Man Ragdoll. And it's a game you can actually play yourselves right now because you can just do it quietly. No one even needs to know you're doing it. And it's one of these, it's used in mindfulness and yoga and things like that sometimes, where you just tighten up every single muscle in your body as tight as you can. Okay? Great for your pelvic floor, by the way. So go ahead and do it. And then you just release it. And we do that a few times, especially if we're feeling some big feelings. And it's amazingly effective in actually helping us to rebalance. It sends signals to our brain that tells us, okay, rebalance, calm, let's get things back into perspective. Takes that moment. So our body and our mind working together. That's one of those skills when you think about that Venn diagram. And during the workshop with the children, well, we can have a closer look at this because Harold has a big disappointment to deal with. And spoiler alert, his big disappointment is that he's been looking forward to a sleepover. And for one reason or another, it can't happen. It might be because there's a lockdown. That was last year's story. It might be because there's no petrol in the petrol station. That was a little bit earlier this year. It might just be because the car's broken down. That was today's story. And so to cope with his disappointment, the children show him and remind him of this game. He does it with them right on the screen, right up close to the camera. And together, they can then rebalance and come up with some new ideas. Okay, coping with disappointment is a theme that comes through here, and it relates to SCARF. So just to remind you, if you've talked about SCARF with me before, it's an acronym. It stands for safety, caring, achievement, resilience, which is a big part of what we're doing now, and friendship. Okay, so SCARF as a curriculum is built on those principles. It's a values-led approach to personal social health education, okay, economic education. So these values, they wrap around other things that the schools are working on. So we work with the teachers initially to look at the school values. How does SCARF work with your school values? It should help you do what you're already doing. So we don't want this to be additional. We want it to be helping schools to achieve what they're already trying to achieve. All right. Back to our very quick tour. We move on into year one with that really tremendous bingo game that comes out of that bucket full of feelings. So after the children have actually thrown happy in, well, they throw in a few more. Okay, and then a few more after that. And we use the feelings in this bucket to then play feelings bingo. So it's all about being able to name feelings, being able to show feelings, as you saw the children do in the video clip. Even a very simple feeling can be quite tricky sometimes. So we name it, we show it, pop it into the bucket, see if we can recognize it on somebody else's face. And there are some really tricky feelings on that board. All right. And one of the ones I'm always fascinated by, let's see if I can find it in here. Somewhere in my bucket. Oh, yes, here it is. There's the feeling, silly. Somebody always throws it in. And I'm just curious. And again, just unmute yourselves and pop in if you've got an idea. If you had to choose somebody on that board who you think is feeling silly, who would you choose? Oh, hold up. Oh, that's good. Okay, so we've got number 9 there. Oh, let me look at you all bigger. Okay, yeah, hold up your fingers. That's a nice way to do it. Oh, we've got number 5 there. Oh, number 6 there. Oh, interesting. We're all over the place. Well, number 8 might be feeling silly. That's interesting. Okay. Did anybody choose number 1? No, you're shaking your head. Do you know how many times children choose number 1? It's really interesting. Most often they choose 4, sometimes 5, very often 9, sometimes 2, and then there's 1. Do you have any ideas on why children might choose number 1 as feeling silly? Go on, unmute yourself if you're talking.
Because they're often told when they're crying not to be so silly.
Thanks, Jackie. Absolutely. Sometimes we get some really great lessons as adults by hearing what children say and really listening to them. And that is exactly what they say. So, because there's no rights or wrongs in this game. And so we check it out. Sometimes what will happen is the teacher will say, oh, that's not it. And I'll come in. But actually, if we've worked effectively with the teachers beforehand, they will go with it. Okay. They'll go with the fact there's not a right or wrong. We're going to explore them all. They'll vote on them. And then I'll come back and say, right, let's think about why did some people say number 1? And that is invariably what they say. So sometimes we just need to check as grown-ups what we're saying to children. Is that a silly feeling to be upset? I don't know. I don't think so myself. Anyway, so, and again, that's something really valuable to bring into the parent session and the carers session as well. Moving on to year 2, this is a new workshop. So last year when I talked to people, we only had 4 workshops, okay? Originally 3, and then we added another one. Now we have all of these workshops. And so I've been working with children today to play a different game. We play a board game in this one, and the teacher rolls the die. I move us along the board. We pop a little mark down wherever we land. And then, let's just pop a mark on somewhere there. Anyway, I won't worry about it too much. Right, so pop a mark. Oh, you can't even see that mark, so I won't worry about that. But anyway, wherever we land, we then have a problem to solve. And the problem that we need to solve is something to do with the fact that Harold, Kiki and Derek have gone out without their grown-ups. They were allowed. There's a play leader at the playground just to be safe. And they need to keep safe together. So we talk about road safety, safety around strangers, what to do if you've fallen and bumped your head, how to take care of things like your bicycle on the way. Is it all right to leave it on the pavement or not? The children do loads of voting as we go along. Things like, actually, what do you do if your friends are playing giant chess and you're a bit bored? All right, all sorts of things. And they hold up their emojis. Is it safe and healthy, or is it not so safe and not so healthy? Get them talking to each other, explaining to me, explaining to Harold, and then we move along the board. As we go around, we're working our way around the 5 ways to well-being with activities. Every time we hear the bell, that's an activity. We get to go forward to get to that one. You hear Harold's bicycle horn? We go backwards and we do an activity. And the activities are something active, something creative, a mindful moment, give a smile to your teacher, for a gift to others, whatever it is. And by the end, we need to have completed all 5 activity cards, hopefully, okay, as one of the things we're doing, all right, just to give you a little flavor. As we move through, okay, more coping with disappointment in year 3, but it's all right because we end up with a rap. I was going to teach the rap, but I think we're okay. Let me just carry on because I really need to come to an end soon. But Harold has to change his song to a different way of performing. And he does the most tremendous beatboxing. I'll show you that another time. In year 4, we're thinking about identity. Okay? Before I come, the children fill in these identity trees. If I'm really lucky, and actually more often than not, teachers are brilliant about this, they will send me a few examples. Very occasionally they send me 30. I can't deal with 30, but if they send me a couple, then I can create a slide which is for that class. There's so valuing for the children to actually see their own work on the screen in front of them. So up it comes. And we explore, well, what is this all about, this idea of identity? And we come up with the idea that we are unique, actually. That's a really big idea. There's never been anybody like you before. There'll never be anybody like you again. And this relates to another workshop that we do in our face-to-face delivery, also in year 4. And I think probably the best comment I've ever heard about this idea that we're unique, and we're thinking about this in some detail at this age, sort of 8, 9 years old. As a child said to me on the Life Bus years ago, said, "It sounds a bit like infinity." I thought that was the most tremendous way to think about it. First of all, who even knew they knew the word infinity? I suppose they've got Buzz Lightyear and infinity and beyond and all that. But it was tremendous. I thought it is that abstract and that enormous. And it makes some children terribly uncomfortable. It makes some children feel really lonely to think that they're only one of them. It makes other children feel really special. And so we go on and we think about this. One school actually sent me notes that they had put together, along with then quotes from the children from their part 1. So instead of sending me trees, they said, this is what the children said as we were doing the part 1 lesson. The amount of learning that's going on and the deep thinking that's going on with these children, I think, is tremendous. I thought those quotes were brilliant. And the kind of thinking they're doing at 8 and 9 years old is just tremendous. Okay. So again, I'm going to move swiftly on. That's what year 4 looks like. We go on to think about the idea that as great as it is, actually being unique can lead to some tricky situations. So we've met some famous people like Greta Thunberg and Mo Farah and Ellie Simmons and Sadiq Khan. We look at them, we think about achievement, we think about resilience, then we think about what does this look like when you're a young person? And actually what it looks like is somebody else is allowed to play the game that's an 18 and you're not. What do you do? Actually, what's it like to keep on looking at websites and with images that are not true to life? And how does that impact how we feel about ourselves? I know there's going to be a real focus this year on growing together around Children's Mental Health Week, and in Hertfordshire in particular there's going to be a focus on actually body image is the focus in Hertfordshire Young Minds. So that relates so tremendously well to what we're doing with this. Being new to the class, not knowing English and so on. And then we move on. So year 5, you've seen we do a big focus on that well-being wheel. You saw some examples of that work. And then we come back to our drugs content. So our new workshops in year 6, we focus on some of these emotional needs that are a bit more specific. So things like, actually, there's a lot to look after ourselves and different things become important at different times. Okay? And so we look at some scenarios and we think about, well, what's most important to the young person who's rung into the advice line? And we're training the children up to be advisors on this advice line. So that's our context in year 6 mainly. So what about the person who's moving house? What's the most important need for that young person? What about the one who's been left out of the chat group online? And what's the most important need? What can they do? How do they solve these problems? And then we pick up on the drugs content. And our example drugs are either alcohol. Well, good timing, Gordon. That was excellent. So they're either alcohol or it's cigarette smoking. So we choose one or the other to focus on. And within that context, the children then explore that knowledge, skills, and attitudes kind of Venn diagram in much more detail. So today we were working on the one. I was with Phoenix Pelham today. They were thinking about this one where someone's been handed a glass of champagne. They're 12. They've gone to a wedding with their mum. Their mum doesn't drink alcohol. They're feeling really awkward. So it's a kind of situation that really could happen, actually. It's not the kind of, oh, someone trying to make you drink. It's just that kind of, oh, everyone's having a drink. What's the expectation? What do you do if you're 12 and someone's just giving you this glass of wine or champagne in this case? And so the children explore that issue. What are the reasons people might choose to drink? Okay, they're at a wedding in this case. Okay, so there are some kind of real social pressures or kind of expectations there. What are the reasons a person might choose not to drink? Okay, so we let the children explore that. We get a bit of knowledge about alcohol itself to make sure we have sort of a common platform to talk from. And we think about what could this young person do? What are the skills that they need to make a decision? Okay. We explore the law. The law is tricky around alcohol. And we also finally, just before I finish, we think about social norms. And I will give you this to have a little think about yourselves. So we've done one about cigarettes with you before, but let's do the one about alcohol, because every couple of years in this country, young people answer questions online for the government to kind of think about where they're putting funding in terms of health education and so on. And on this graph here, if you can see it in this bar chart, we're working from nearly 20 years ago, okay? Back in 2003, these little grey bars here are the percentage of young people between the ages of 11 to 15 who said they had had a drink of alcohol within the last week, okay? So very few, about 6% of 11-year-olds, all the way up to nearly half of 15-year-olds. Overall, this group, 25% and a quarter of them would have had a drink of alcohol in the last week, okay? Now, just by pointing up or pointing down, can you just say where you think it would be for young people these days? Do you think the proportion's gone up or gone down for young people who kind of, drink of alcohol in the last week? Come on, commit yourself. Going up, going down, going down, going down, got another down. Okay, right, okay, brilliant. Okay, there's no judgment on this, just curious about what you're thinking. Okay, so we've got mostly downs there. A couple of people who think it might have gone up. Actually, I will show you where it's gone, because survey in 2014 showed that in every single age group, okay, children self-reported a tremendous drop, okay, in actually drinking alcohol. Young people, if they're choosing to drink alcohol, are generally choosing to drink it later, so they're starting later, which is actually really good news in terms of brain development in particular, okay, and future susceptibility to being dependent on alcohol. The later somebody actually starts drinking alcohol, the more likely they are to make decisions which are healthier around it, and also it not to develop habits which could be really harmful around alcohol. Actually, 2018's data, the whole group dropped again. Every single age dropped again. So the whole group now is down to 6%. It's a real social change. Now, for young people, that stayed low. For adults, it's gone up in the last 2 years. Okay. Overall, the trend for the country went down, everybody, until lockdown. And it's gone up. I will be interested to see what happens with young people, but hopefully part of our work is to try and make sure that that 6% carries on going down or stays down. And that's why we do what we do. It's to really help young people think through the kinds of decisions they will be making before they're having to be faced with actually making them. So they know they've got those skills. They can think about their attitudes in these situations. I'm not going to go into the detail of what comes after that. But I did say I would, just before I finish, talk a little bit about the relationships education. I'm not going to talk about it an awful lot. But just to give you an idea, with what's involved in the relationships education workshops, we have 4 different workshops. One of them is called Time for Change, which is about puberty. This particular set of learning outcomes is a combination of the puberty Time for Change focus and our workshop for year 4, which is about keeping safe in a more general way. And this, I put together a composite program for a school last year who wanted their year 4s to have a bit of a mixture. So that's what we did. To make sure, because they were very worried how much the children missed by not being in school around the growing and changing units in particular. So those are the kinds of things that we cover, okay? We work with the children, set up a group agreement. So this is a photograph from that very same school. This is actually the year 6 group in that school. The children decide what's the session going to look like. They set the ground rules. What's important in these ground rules when we're dealing with tricky situations is that what we say is confidential unless there's a safeguarding issue, in which case myself or the teacher would talk privately. The teacher would talk privately. I would talk to the teacher about if I thought there was somebody was worried, and the children could break confidentiality to a teacher, a trusted adult, if they thought their friend was in danger. Okay, but otherwise, what said in the room stays in the room, so that we feel free to talk. And really, there's no rights and wrong answers in this. We need to explore the wider issues. Okay, so you see the kind of things that children think. They're very sensible, actually, on the whole. So those were their ground rules in year 6. We look at things like, how do we keep safe as we're growing up? So we meet 3 characters. It's not Harold this time, but in this case, we're meeting Jess, Jake, and Jemima. And the way we get into the situation around how we look after our bodies, well, actually, the situation for Jess, Jake, and Jemima are that they've gone on holiday. They want to go swimming. Okay, Jess is like not at all worried. She's like, "Come on, everyone into your costumes. Off we go to this. Get into the sea." But the other 2 are not feeling so sure anymore that they want to start changing in front of everybody. So why is that the case? And that launches us into being able to talk about how bodies are changing, how people feel about how their bodies are changing, what to expect as they're growing up. These programs, we start talking about puberty and those sorts of changes in SCARF from year 3. We know girls in particular can actually start puberty as young as the age of 8. It's not unusual. So if children are going to be equipped and prepared for what's happening with their bodies, and actually I'm really pleased that changing bodies, growing together, and body image is such a focus, actually, even especially in Hertfordshire coming up this year. I think it's really helpful. So on we go. And we're thinking about how do we manage this. We work with things like the NSPCC, okay? So the privates are private, and think about the pants rules. The children work with that. We think about, what does consent mean? It's really important that children understand about consent, and that they have some opportunities, okay, to actually practice consent. So they practice asking each other, saying yes and saying no to different situations. What does it feel like to say yes? What does it feel like to say no in these situations? Okay. And just by that experience of just practicing with something like this, we can explore lots of the issues that come up, okay, and that could arise as a result of maybe someone filming someone, okay, but what's happening in this world of selfies, okay. So we deal with the online as well as the face-to-face world, because that's how children live. They're living online as well as face-to-face with people. Yeah, that was the Feeling Good week. So as you see, body positivity is the focus. 5 Ways to Wellbeing, you can see it coming through other organisations. We didn't make that up. Okay, that came from the New Economics Foundation originally. It's probably been around in different ways over the years. So the NHS has picked that up as well. So I thought this Healthy Young Minds and Hearts was a really good place to just be kind of knowing that we're on track with kind of what's happening much more generally. I'm going to finish that there. I will stop for any questions. I do want to draw attention to the website, but I can do that very quickly, perhaps after you've had a chance to ask questions, if you have any at this point.
Thanks very much, Nancy. That was fascinating. Right, I'm sure there's lots of questions. Let me get the gallery view on my screen so I can see. Everyone is muted. Any questions? Peter.
The statistic that you showed us about children drinking, I think I've come across that before recently, and it struck me as something that was very hard to understand. And isn't it of fundamental, or can't it possibly be of fundamental importance to finding out why for the use in formulating education strategies for the future? I mean, it seems to me something that's quite remarkable, and what's caused it, understanding that can be most helpful for future in many ways.
Yeah. And in terms of our work, the reason we use that particular, that's a slide I would use with year 6. That slide I just showed you is one that we use with the year 6s. They could actually just see that demonstration. The reason we use that particular kind of information is to explore with the children in just a very basic way. We're kind of introducing. I remember they're sort of 10, 11 years old, so they're not hugely sophisticated with it. But to understand that this concept of social norms, that sometimes when we're evaluating risk, and those 2 programs that include the drugs content, they're very much around assessing risk. And And sometimes we're influenced in our decisions and how we assess risk by what we think other people are doing. And actually, as grown-ups, sometimes we have an idea that teenagers are just like, they all drink, don't they? All teenagers try things. All teenagers take huge risks. Actually, even teenagers who are predisposed and quite sensibly, and in terms of evolution, need to be predisposed to taking risks in order to grow and develop. Actually, very few people in society, even teenagers, take risks which are going to be harmful to themselves. It's a minority of people. To have the children see that actually everybody's doing something is unlikely. It's usually a very small number of people who are doing the things that are really risky. That can help to equip them with the confidence to say, actually, no, it's not true everyone's doing it. If they have that in their minds, that sort of social norms message, we feel that's actually really helpful to decision making and behaviors eventually. That's what the social norms theory is anyway, in a nutshell. But yes, understanding the actual mechanisms behind why are young people maybe drinking less and so on, that's something that actually they'll follow on with even more as they go into secondary school. And there are all kinds of things at play, partly interest in their health. Lots of it is the messaging that's coming out, the effects of things like advertising or not advertising, availability, price, all sorts of things coming in there, and hopefully they're all working together to create a healthier next generation. But even if it's not alcohol, they will take other risks. So that's our example. How do we help them in whichever situation they're in to keep themselves safe, really? Not that answered your question, but I just thought I'd talk about it anyway.
Okay, Peter Blaskus, you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, I've done that. Yes, that was fascinating all round. I'm no teacher, as my wife will tell me, who is, but I noticed one lad in the middle of that group who really wasn't responding very much. Now, you'd pick that up straight away, I'm sure. So what is the sort of policy? Do you beam in on them, or just hope they get carried along by the enthusiasm of the others?
Yes, they were very funny, that group. To be fair on that group, it was the last week of July. And a very hot day, and they were the half a dozen children who were in school. So I will give them a little break on that. No, what we try and do is make sure that the workshops are really active. So they're pacey, that they're interactive, so we are creating that sort of magic moment for them. Different children will be in and out for different sorts of things. You'll see behind me I've put up a few bits and pieces, so I use my space as if I were in the life bus of the life space. So, if we're talking about something, it goes up on the wall, okay? So we need a first aid kit, it's going to go up on the wall. All kinds of things get stuck up there. So we're using real objects, we're using games, we're using kind of song, we use, the rap, all kinds of things to keep the children engaged. That particular child, he was fascinating because he kind of ended up really open-mouthed, and he like, huh? What's going on there? You can also see, actually, there was probably something going on with that child's processing. My background's in special needs education. I actually was quite impressed by him because I could see him really listening, and then as the children did things, he would do it like 4 seconds later, which is really interesting. So one of the things that's trickier about being online, to be honest, is to be able to pick up on the children who might not be so forthcoming. So part of my work with the teachers is to really encourage them to work in a way that is very inclusive. Right? That's more limited in an online situation. When I'm face to face, partly because of my background in special needs, but also just because of the skills that we try and hone as educators, I would hone in on children to help them come in. Part of what we do that hopefully will allow that to happen, regardless of whether I'm online or face-to-face, we use very open questioning styles. So one of the skills that we really practice, it's quite different. I'm a teacher. There were some things I had to almost unlearn as a teacher and relearn to be a facilitator of these conversations. And one of those things was to ask questions not about things like, if we're talking about the body, what does the heart do? Actually, for some children, if they don't know what the heart does, they're going to turn straight off. Okay, the children who know what the heart does, I'm here. But if we turn that question into a statement that just says, "Oh, what if people heard about the heart?" Then actually, there's no right or wrong there. You could have heard anything about the heart. Okay, and more children will offer their ideas. So we work really hard. It's a harder thing than you think, to make sure that the way that I'm communicating in whichever form, face to face or online, has those sorts of elements that are weight. I give quite a lot of wait time, even online. All right, not so long that we kill the pace, but we listen to the children really carefully. We use the children's names as much as possible. Again, it's a little bit trickier online, but if the teacher's working well with me, the teacher will be saying the children's names, sometimes repeating so I can hear properly, and then I can pick up. And I can say, oh, Lewis, now you mentioned, or I might be taking some notes. So I have in front of me a little notepad, and on my notepad, I'm keeping really careful notes about, well, in this case, they were coming up with what's the definition of risk. Well, as the teacher was gathering the ideas from the children, I was like, okay, I'm going to pick up on what Alfie said, I'm going to pick up on what Zach said, so I'll be here very carefully and out of the way making notes so I can say, oh, Zach, that's interesting that you mentioned about the parachute, or whatever. So I've got something. So that's how we do it. We try and make sure we use names, we use open questions, and we really actively listen to the children. And lots of my behaviour, which is actually really interesting near the camera, will be modelling those things. So if the children are talking, I don't just sit back and do something else. Children, I can't actually hear them. Of course I can't. They're talking in groups in another room across the country. But I can look like I'm listening. And so I show those listening behaviours, and that in itself will encourage them to keep talking and be ready to feed back. So does that sort of answer the kind of thing you were thinking?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
One last there's two questions, Irene and Susan.
Nancy, what happens if you've got a teacher who knows that she has a particularly disruptive child in her class? Do you ever find that I mean, presumably she tries not to exclude any children, but what happens if you have a child like that? Because if you're in the classroom with them, it's easier, but online that must create a different situation.
It does actually, it's interesting. As far as I know, because I can't always know if somebody's not in the classroom or so on. So online, I'm a little bit limited with that. But again, by working with the teachers beforehand and letting them know what's coming up, and also by having the 3-part program, the teachers have a lot more available so that they can use their skills to make sure the children are included. So we always work in a very inclusive way. And the teachers who have experience of working with us won't worry about it so much. Somebody who's new to us might say, oh, I'm not sure so-and-so is going to be able to do this. If they tell me, then I will be able to say to them, actually, I will differentiate. I'll make that happen. I haven't had a request for this online, but it's something that I've offered to teachers. No one's picked it up. But like in the Life Bus, the Life Space, if there were children who felt really anxious about coming into a different space or meeting a new person, some of them feel really worried about meeting Harold. Some children are really frightened of puppets. We always used to give them a pre-visit. And so we'd ask them to come in with one of their grown-ups beforehand so that they could meet me. I could introduce them to Harold. I could show them the space. I could just say, like things are sticking to the wall because it's Velcro. Would demystify the environment. So whereas the surprises are great for most children, children who are anxious don't like surprises. So I would demystify it. Now, we could do that with a little meeting online beforehand, but it hasn't seemed to be necessary. I think... trusting that the teachers are working fairly inclusively, I think one of the things that's actually possibly easier for children who might be anxious or worried is that they're not coming into a new environment. So while the environment can be really helpful to what we do, it could be for children who actually would find it difficult, that they find it easier to be in their familiar space. Interacting online for lots of children who are anxious is actually also easier than interacting face to face. There's not so much direct pressure on them. So as far as I know, there hasn't been a big issue. There's nothing that I've actually seen has come up as a big issue, other than occasionally a teacher's, not complete control of their class or whatever. But that's very unusual. That as long as the teachers are working with me very actively, but they do have to work with me. I did have a teacher actually on Monday this week, just yesterday. That was only yesterday, wasn't it? Who went and did something else at the back of the class. I keep calling back. It wasn't a teacher. I think it was supply, to be fair. It was either a supply or possibly it was a teaching assistant. They hadn't been in the training. It wasn't the teacher I was expecting to be there. So I think that teacher was out. And this teacher didn't understand that they had to, there was reception. They didn't understand they had to be right there, front and center, to make the conversation happen. And the children were like, oh, anyway, eventually I just called her back and explained to her really quickly and simply what she had to do. You know, it was sort of like I stepped out of my facilitator mode and into kind of bossy Nancy mode. Said, right, you've got to stay here, you've got to do this and do that. And then she did, and it all went fine after that. So yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think again it offers for some children perhaps some benefits that would be trickier if I were there face to face. There are things again, partly because of my own background in special needs education, but also just because of being face to face, that are easier to pick up. Certainly, working with the relationships education work, we not me, but a couple of the other educators had a try at putting that online. And we decided no, that wasn't safe to do online, and it would cause problems with children feeling worried, feeling excluded, and not actually very helpful. So that's why we've kept that face to face. And I did have some children with quite significant needs actually in one of my schools last year. In one of the year sixes actually, they had 2 sessions. It was at Godsbeck's Primary in Colchester. So the teacher was so worried they hadn't got what they needed. We did a puberty session, or keeping safe with puberty, and then we did the sex education work, like the where babies come from. And this one child was just beside themselves with not thinking they were going to cope, and actually they managed to stay for the whole of both of those sessions, and the teacher was just like, oh, they've never stayed for anything in their lives before. So although she looked tremendously uncomfortable through the whole thing, she actually stayed, and then she came and chatted with me in between sessions during the lunchtime and so on. So I could see she was actually really engaged, which was great. But yeah, so just different.
Just one quick question.
I've got one.
Right, Colin, come on.
Yeah, is it okay? When Joan and I sat in on some of your sessions, Nancy, what really impressed us the most, although lots of it impressed us, but was the influence that it was having on the teachers. That this was a whole new ball game for the teacher, who previously just sat at the back of the class or even sent in the teaching assistant, but now they were actively engaging in this, and in some cases seemed to be learning a new set of skills in terms of open questions, and you could see them sort of preparing themselves almost for carrying on after the session in the mode that you were using during your session.
Absolutely. In this particular way of working live online, it's opened up a different opportunity. One of the things I love about it is that it's like, it's not better or worse, it's just different. And some of those new skills are technology skills. Haven't we all learned a few technology skills? And just working more effectively with the technology in this time when teachers are still working with children at home and having to do remote learning, all that in itself, I think, has been really helpful. Because there are better and worse ways of working online. And actually, because I'm doing it all day, every day, there's a lot to learn from each other with that one. But yeah, the teachers' skills are being used in a different way, and I personally, I think that's really great. I love that ability to work with the teachers much more actively and feel like that's got to have such a big impact on what's happening as we leave, and the fact that the program has something else to do afterwards, it's really directly linked, and just carrying on the conversation. So much comes up that we can't get into detail about, and so the teachers have got that ready so they can carry on that conversation. I think that's really great.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Nancy. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
Sure
I did promise you I'd take you to the website, but I think I will trust you to go to the website yourself. So, but I can put a link in.
I'm not sure they're trustworthy, Nancy.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. So yeah, just do that. That would be fine. You can find out lots more information there.
Okay, anyone got any other matters they'd like to bring up regarding the club? It's good to see you online, Ian. Okay, well, could I invite you all to raise your glass and toast the Queen and also Rotary?
And Nancy.
And Nancy.
And Nancy.
And thank you, Nancy, for a brilliant talk. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you for having me along, and thank you for all your support. It's really made all of this possible.